Hello, ladies and gentlemen. This is Luke Johnson and Bob Schut, and we are doing our 12th installment of Soren Kierkegaard's Works of Love. Can you read me loud and clear, Bob?
I can. And how about you?
Excellent.
Am I coming through okay?
You're doing well, my friend. You're doing
Good.
well. So, I will be leading this episode, and in my Harper Torchbooks edition, I will be trying to cover pages 159 through 170. What pages does that span in your edition, Bob?
Mine starts on 157 through 170, so we're pretty close.
What edition are you using again?
Oh, the Harper Perennial Modern Thought. That's what it looks like there, like that guy.
Right on. So let's just jump right into it. This might be a short one, it might be a longer one. It kind of depends on the nature of our discussion. So, when we love encountered individuals, we ought not to fantasize about what they could become, aka their kindly alluded to potential. An infatuation with potential is a failure to love the man we see. We are really loving a phantasm of the imagination. Desiring a person to possess endearing perfections naturally springs out of our personal wishes and care for their sake. However, we cannot perfect them. We ought not to take credit for their personal evolution if it ever happens. It is enough to simply concentrate on loving them in the present moment. What do you think about that, Bob? Would you like to add anything?
Well, he's talking here about the difference between actual love and the imaginary love, where we see the person, the individual, as the way we hope them to become, as opposed to who they are right now. And I think that's what this whole episode is going to deal with.
Agreed. So let's go deeper into it. So, Kierkegaard advises us to love the beloved like we would any other ordinary person we encounter. If we treat them as something special, then our mind will be double. We do not love the person we see, and he writes on page 162 of the Harper Torchbooks edition, "You look at him with one eye, searching, investigating, scanning critically, and only with the other eye, alas, do you see that he is the beloved. But to be divided thus is not loving the person we see." So, it's like there is a third person present picking the other apart. Why must we interrogate a person so when life presents enough tests? So man has to root out the double-mindedness and fastidiousness in order to love people as they are. When we love those that we see, our love is limitless. There is no end to the number of individuals we can love, nor does the love cease if changes occur to the love object. This raises some interesting questions that I hope Bob and I will ponder here for a second. Is Kierkegaard essentially advocating a monkish sort of view where everyone is to be treated like a brother or sister? Is there something manifestly wrong with having a beloved? I believe these issues have come up in previous episodes. For some reason, at this stage of my life, I can get my head around the idea of treating friends equally. The idea of having a very best friend, one that is prioritized above all others, seems a bit juvenile. No offense to Bob, but a lot of best friends have entered and exited my life rather quickly. Not that I think Bob will do that. So I'm not sure I'm prepared to give up on this idea of finding a true love, though. I'm concerned that if we take Kierkegaard's words seriously, the life partner becomes devalued and takes on a more functional role than a deeply valued romantic one. So how are we to make sense of this tension within Kierkegaard's work? What do you think, Bob? Bob, what do you think?
That's a good way to put it. That's an interesting way to see that. I didn't see that originally, so I'm kind of thinking about that now. I think that if I remember correctly, what Kierkegaard is trying to do here is set up a form of Christian love that is the underlying element in all our loves. In other words, he's not giving us a different love here, but rather saying this is the love that permeates through all the other loves. So this Christian love that we have for one another as friends, Christian love I also have for my wife, Christian love I have for my relatives, and for the stranger is all of this type of love. But there's different intensities of this, and there's different contexts of this love. And there's different ways that this love develops. My love for my wife certainly develops differently than my love for a friend or my love for a stranger. But they all apparently have this underlying Christian love. That's what makes it different. He says that it's dangerous to think that we should love in the world of the unseen, that we should love in the world of the seen, in the world of reality. In this kind of love, in that unseen way that you were talking about, that more meditative love, that we can become so meditative that reality slips away from us and we become lost in our imagination. And I think that's what happens in the world of monkery, if that is such a word, is that sometimes reality slips away. You know, we tend to think of people in the way we want them to be rather than who they really are. And then, of course, we get very disappointed with them. And perhaps that's the reason we have so many divorces and so many friendships don't last, as you were saying, is because we're expecting too much out of our friends and out of our loved ones in many different ways. And we have to focus here. What he's telling us is to focus on who the individual is. And I think what he's going to do is bring us around to how God loves us. As we talk about later on, Peter and Jesus, I think we'll see he's going to bring this back to another context. So that would be what I would add.
So what about this issue of double-mindedness? So, yeah, he's trying to establish this baseline of Christian love, but then we layer on top of that romantic love. How does that not give us some sort of heterogeneous mixture where we start picking apart our significant other? How do we prevent ourselves from seeing them as being some sort of functional object?
Well, I think that if
I'm putting you on the spot.
No, if we maintain, we always have to be careful of objectifying people. And Kierkegaard would be, I think, the last person who would objectify an individual. All his writings are against objectifying anybody. But I'm not sure I understand the question clear enough. Can you ask me that question a little differently?
Right. So if he's saying that there is this foundational Christian love, right? But then we layer platonic and romantic love on top of it, how do we not develop a split personality? You know?
Well, in my own experiences, they're different loves. Again, the way I love my wife is different than the way I love a stranger. But I don't feel any dichotomy. I don't feel any split that I'm two different people. I feel that there's an underlying love that I have, that I need to love the stranger and I need to love my wife with this Christian love that does not set too high of an expectation on those individuals that they have to be perfect in order for me to love them. That would be the danger that he's trying to avert, is to say, what if I make a pattern, a model? These are the people that I will love, and they have to have these qualities. And if we set that standard, we're going to set that standard for romantic love, we're going to set it for stranger love or neighborly love, and we're going to set it for friendship love. But we don't want to set any kind of preconceived notion of how we want that person to become. This is what I think a perfect person would be like. But rather to be able to freely offer our love to somebody. And I think it's more that than it is getting something from the individual. I think when we set a standard for who are we going to love, who are we going to be nice to, we make it more, what are we going to get out of it? What kind of satisfaction am I going to get out of this relationship? What are they going to offer me if they're not perfect, if they're not exactly what I want? It's more of an egotistical way of setting up, and I think it would fall more that way, the way that you were suggesting, into the dichotomy, if we set that standard. By not setting the standard, we allow ourselves to love freely. And I think it's a healthier love, to love freely, and therefore we don't have that split personality because we're loving everybody with that foundational love all the same. The love that's built upon that, I think, is again more of a context of who the individual is. But that other love remains the same. So in a way, I love my wife the same way I love my friends, the same way I love a stranger, at the very basis. Not a love that requires transformation on their part where they need to live up to my expectations, but rather that I can love them all freely. And from that point on, the transformation would take place. I love my wife in a different way, and our relationship will transform differently than the way I love my neighbor, which will also be transformative, but it won't demand transformation. You know what? In other words, it's not a requirement of my love, the transformation.
I think that's a good way of putting it. The way that I sort of was thinking about it as you were talking was that what if we were to imagine it like this, where we could be erotically bonded with an individual, right? But if that's the only thing that is the source of the relationship that we have with them, when things are imperfect, we'll do this sort of cost-benefit analysis, right, and decide to keep going or break up. But we know that Christian love is there, and there is a harmonization of all the different loves that are involved as a friend, as a lover, and as a Christian. If that Christian love is compelling us to remain dedicated to that person regardless of the perfections, imperfections that they may lose or develop. Would that be a good way of saying it?
Yeah, I think it would be to remain open to the love for the individual. We get in a little problem later on if we say, when do we stop with a person? You know, if there's a rejection, we'll talk about that with Peter. At least I will. I'll bring that up as a question. But for now, we need to love people, not see their defects and imperfections so much, but rather see them and don't allow them to influence us. And that's what he was getting at. Yeah, we're going to see imperfections in our lovers and in our friends, but we can't allow that to influence us as far as restrict our love for them, because our love will be transformative. And we'll kind of get into that as we move along.
Sure. All right, let me go back to my notes then. I think we did a pretty good job answering those questions. In the next significant section, Kierkegaard asks, what do you do if your friend denies you, and examines the dynamic between Christ and Peter. Christ is not ashamed at Peter when Peter denies him. Christ knows of Peter's imperfections and does not turn away, but rather gives him a reproachful and saving look. Because Christ knows that it is really Peter who is in danger. And he says this on page 167. The Savior of the world did not make the mistake of regarding his cause lost if Peter did not hurry to help him. Rather, saw Peter lost if he did not hurry to save Peter. That was a pretty interesting quote. Let me get back here. Christ alone understood this, no one else. What is the takeaway here? How are we to answer the question that initiated this section? If we are to follow the example of Christ, it seems that we are not to think of our own security if denied by our friend. Being preoccupied with our victimization status indicates an improper constitution of being. It is our friend, the one who has denied us, that is in danger of falling away from righteousness and reconciliation. We are to persist in love for them if they deny us, so that they can be rescued from the danger of perdition. What would you like to add to that, Bob?
Yeah, I saw here that Jesus was the one that we would suspect as being in danger. Here Jesus is standing before the Sanhedrin, who are going to turn him over to the Romans, who eventually he's going to be crucified, and everything is standing on that. Of all people who was in danger, it was Jesus. But yet, Kierkegaard says Jesus sees Peter as the one in danger, because it was everything in Jesus' life is seen through the eyes of faith, not through present circumstances. So through present circumstances, Jesus would appear to be the one in danger. But in faith, in the context of faith, Peter is really the one who's in danger, because he's losing his faith. He's giving up his faith temporarily, or at least allowing his faith to be overcome by his fear. And to me, that was the interesting way that Kierkegaard brings that out here, that Jesus does see everything in the context of faith, and that would explain why he would feel more fear for Peter rather than for himself, more concern for Peter rather than for himself.
Yeah, I think that was a really interesting aspect to this section that we had to prepare for today, that one ought never to feel rejected. One should really be praying for the person that rejects you, which is an interesting way of turning it on its head. So I'll finish out here, since we have mastered this section pretty well. Perhaps a great testament to Christian love's heavenly origins is that it loves a person regardless of changes. Human love flees when the beloved's perfections have left the building. Christ did not wait for the perfect man, for he knew he would never find him. Christ was the perfect man, making the search for another completely superfluous and self-contradictory. In Christianity, we do not seek the perfect person. We try to be perfect by limitlessly loving. To love perfectly, you must love the imperfect people placed in your path. So, that's what I had prepared for today, and I think it was a really wonderful lesson. Would you like to add anything to it, Bob?
Yeah, there's two comments that I have in my own notes here. The very last comment based upon that is, does this mean that we become eternally bound to one person? In other words, that the danger, if we take this in one context, if we want to love a particular individual, or let's say a stranger, we run into a stranger who betrays us, or a stranger, or even a friend who betrays us, at what point do we say enough is enough? At what point do we break our connection with that individual? It's something that we need to probably think about. We're not simply to love one person, but we're told to love our neighbor, which means whoever crosses our path. If we focus on one individual, we're going to miss many other individuals, because we don't have limitless time on this earth. So our time has to be accounted for, and we have to decide, how are we going to spend it? Are we going to spend it trying to win this one individual, or are we going to try to help more people as well? This is always, difficult decisions. But we have enough love to love many neighbors. We have to remember, even though time is limited, our love is not. Our love is endless, because it's spiritual. It lives in the world of the eternal. So we can love many, many people. We don't have to focus on one individual and say, well, I've got to win this one person to Christ. And if I don't win this, then I'm a failure. Point is, sometimes, as Jesus said, you have to shake the sand off your sandals and move along. Another point I wanted to make is something came to my mind when I was reading this, where you've heard maybe you haven't heard the old adage that we hate the sin but love the sinner. Have you ever heard that term before?
Of course.
Okay. That is not what he's talking about here. He's not talking about loving people and not thinking about their sin. This isn't the lesson, because the problem is many people who say that and give that as advice, I would ask them, so you're telling me that you hate pedophilia, but you actually love the pedophile? You're telling me that you hate rape, but you really love the rapist? I think most people would, if they could confess in their own heart, would say, well, no, I really don't do that. I mean, it's easy to say the sin in the sense of, as long as the sin is like lying or cheating or doing something like that. But when it comes to some of these other more serious crimes, to God, most people are not really able to separate one from the other. And that's not what Kierkegaard is saying. He's not, because to me, that's doing exactly the opposite. That's looking at an individual and saying, I'm not going to see him as he really is. I'm going to see him as I want him to be, or as he will be in the future. That's not what Kierkegaard is saying here. What Kierkegaard is saying, you must love the pedophile as he is. You must love the rapist as he is. And then let your love be the transforming power in his life. That's what he's really trying to say. It's easy to do that dichotomy that we talked about. It's easy to say, I'm not going to see the sins in this person because I can't love him like that. I can't love him with those imperfections. I'll create my own little pure being, and I'll love that being, and then I'll be satisfying God's rule that says love your neighbor. But that's not what Kierkegaard said it is. I found that very interesting. What do you think about my take on that? Do you agree or disagree?
Well, I think it's... I agree. I think it illustrates the otherworldly nature of Christianity, because I don't think this idea would ever suggest itself to the rational, secular, moral mind to love the rapist or love the pedophile. I mean, it would be hard, but I would have to do it. And I feel compelled to do it, and I feel compelled to love people that I wouldn't match my moral standards now. But part of the reason why I feel compelled to do it is because I don't feel worthy of God's love, too. We're all sinners, right? So, I've led a pretty straight and narrow life. But there's still plenty of things in my life that cause separation between me and God, and yet He loves me regardless of those infractions of the law and sin. So for me to not try to emulate that in some way would seem to defeat the entire message of Christianity.
Because Jesus died for all sinners so that they could come to Him. And we have to reflect that same love. It's not that we have to love them in the sense that we justify, or that we, can't think of the other word, accept that behavior or approve of that behavior. But we can still love an individual without approving of that behavior. But that makes it really difficult to love the sinner for the Christian. But that's something we have to face.
But that might be the only way to rehabilitate someone. Like I think about how many people we could actually morally improve if we showed them what authentic Christian forgiveness and mercy look like.
You're absolutely right. Yeah. And that's the only way to make Christian love authentic.
cool. It's hard, but I mean, I haven't seen it on the scale of rape or pedophilia, but I've definitely seen it on the scale of, in my own personal life, where I have persisted in my love of individuals, and I've seen moral improvement occur in their lives.
You've seen what occur in their lives, Luke? Moral
improvement occur in their lives.
Okay.
As a result of persistent Christian love.
Yeah.
So, well, do you have anything else you'd like to say before we close it out, Bob?
No, I think that's it. We'll leave on that tough note.
No, I don't know if it's a tough note to leave out on. I mean, I think it's kind of the beautiful message of Christianity. I think there's something inspiring about it.
Good.
All right. Well, thank you for listening, everyone. Download the Noetic app. I've got a lot of audio editing ahead of me. All right. I'll talk to you soon.
Okay. Bye-bye.